So, we all think we know how this works, right? We've got this incredible 3-pound universe inside our heads, and it creates everything. Every single thought, every feeling, every memory. That's the standard scientific story. It's what we're all taught.
But what if that's not the whole picture? What if the brain doesn't actually create consciousness at all? What if it's more like an antenna, something that just tunes into a signal that's already out there? It sounds pretty wild, I know, but there's some seriously puzzling evidence that points in this direction, and that's what we're going to dive into.
Okay, so where does an idea like that even come from? Well, while most scientists are firmly in the brain as creator camp, there's this fascinating collection of data that just doesn't quite fit. Let's break down the 3 main lines of evidence that suggest something else might be going on.
And this quote right here, it absolutely nails it. You see, any single piece of evidence we're about to look at can be, and often is, dismissed on its own. It's controversial. But when you start stacking them all up, one after another, well, a pattern starts to emerge. And that collective pattern is really hard to just brush aside.
So our first line of evidence comes from the most extreme situation you can possibly imagine. We're talking about reports from people who have gone to the very brink of death, and then, somehow, came back. And this is where it gets really weird. You've got people who, during something like a cardiac arrest, when their brain is being starved of oxygen and should be shutting down, they report that their consciousness isn't fading. It's becoming sharper, clearer, and more real than ever before. Now, how is that even possible?
This whole phenomenon is called a near-death experience, or an NDE. And this isn't just campfire stories. Researchers like Dr. Bruce Grayson over at the University of Virginia have spent their entire careers systematically studying thousands and thousands of these accounts, trying to figure out what is actually happening here.
And within these NDEs, there are 2 types of reports that are just incredibly tough for science to explain. First, you have what's called veridical perceptions. This is when someone who is clinically out of it, totally unconscious, later reports specific real-world events that happened around them, events that are then confirmed by doctors and nurses. And then you've got mindsight. This one is just staggering. People who've been blind from birth report actually seeing for the very first time during their NDE. I mean, that just challenges everything we think we know about how vision and the brain work. All right, so from the end of life, our next clue takes us to the very beginning, to the minds of little kids. Just think about this for a second. We assume memories are stored in our brains, in all those complex neural connections. But what if a little kid, say a 3-year-old, started talking about detailed, specific memories of a life that wasn't their own?
Well, this is exactly what another researcher at the University of Virginia, Ian Stevenson, started investigating decades ago. He called them cases of the reincarnation type. And these are accounts where young children, usually just 2 to 5 years old, just start spontaneously talking about a past life, often with incredible detail.
And I want to be really clear about the scale here. We are not talking about a handful of cute, anecdotal stories. Stevenson and his team meticulously documented and investigated over 2,500 of these cases from cultures all over the globe.
So you have to wonder, right? Is this just childhood fantasy? Well, here's the crucial part, the verification. Stevenson's successor, Dr. Jim Tucker, found that in about 70% of these cases, the very specific things the kids said, like names, places, how they died, could actually be fact-checked and matched to the life of a real person who had died.
Okay, so we've got these clues suggesting consciousness might be active without a brain at death, and that memories might exist before a brain is even fully developed. But what about during our normal lives? Could consciousness actually stretch across physical space? This brings us to our third big area of evidence, non-local sensing, or what some people call psi research. It's basically the idea that a mind can somehow access information without using any of the 5 known senses.
And again, this isn't just some fringe stuff. We're talking about serious research programs. 2 really stand out. First, you have the Stargate Project, a top-secret 20-year program run by the U.S. military and the CIA to see if remote viewing was real. And then there are Jacobo Grinberg-Zilberbaum's university studies, which found what looked like a kind of quantum entanglement, but between the brains of 2 different people.
Now, the Stargate project was definitely controversial, but the final reports from the scientists who actually ran the program, they concluded that the effect was real. Under strict lab conditions, these viewers were able to describe distant, hidden locations with an accuracy that was statistically significant, meaning way better than you'd ever expect from just pure chance.
So, NDEs, past life memories in kids, and remote viewing. 3 totally different, kind of bizarre sets of data. What on earth do we do with all this? Well, there's a really interesting model out there that tries to connect all these dots.
It's called the 3 modes of consciousness hypothesis, and the idea is pretty elegant. It suggests there's this big fundamental awareness that exists outside of time and space, independent of our bodies. Our normal, everyday waking consciousness, that's just a tiny little trickle of it, filtered down by our brain to help us survive. And those paranormal states like NDEs or remote viewing, that's what can happen when the brain's filter gets a little leaky, letting us get a temporary glimpse of that bigger fundamental consciousness.
You see how this just completely flips the script? Instead of the brain being a factory that manufactures consciousness from scratch, this model says the brain is more like a radio receiver that just tunes into consciousness. And think about it. If you damage a radio, the music gets distorted. If you smash the radio, the music stops completely. But the broadcast signal is still out there in the air.
And that really brings us to the bottom line. None of this evidence, not a single piece, proves there's life after death. But what it does, and what it does very powerfully, is it seriously challenges that core assumption that the brain is the be-all and end-all of consciousness. It suggests there's a massive mystery here that we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of.
So we're left with this final, massive question to chew on. If consciousness isn't something that the brain makes, but is instead a fundamental part of reality that the brain just taps into, what does that change about who we are, what the universe is, and our place in all of it? That's a question that's definitely worth pondering.